also that, for example, levelled at Agamben's argument that bare life forms the object of contemporary political control, holds that such a politicisation of exposure sanctifies those amenable to the subjectivation it offers, simultaneously fixing the spectacle of their exploitation in apolitical pathos and further abandoning those deemed unfit for such sanctification. A second, related Christian logic is at work here, according to this criticism, namely the sacrificial logic in which a particular form of suffering is ennobled, raised up and rendered redemptive at the expense of those whose destitution is not quite of the right sort. The thief on the cross who was damned, for example, or, in a different register, Marx's lumpenproletariat. This sanctification would thereby entail the double sacrifice of existence as such. First, in its redemptive assumption into a promise of transcendence. Secondly, in the abandonment of the excessively low. This criticism fails, however, to notice the immanence of the denunciation of exploitation offered by the politics of finitude. For nothing here can be abandoned as too low. No positive attributes are required in order for existence to declare its irreducible equality. There is no possible room here for any distinction between the deserving and the undeserving, or the vanguard and the rabble. The claim that such a politics operates something like a sacrifice of existence is, however, worth considering further. As Nancy has argued, existence as such is unsacrificable. As Antelme demonstrates, if particular beings can be sacrificed, their existence nevertheless remains beyond the economy seeking to convert it into profit. Ironically then, the elaboration of a politics of finitude on the basis of ontological equality risks sacrificing, by instrumentalizing it as political motor, the existence it wants to affirm as beyond any economy of exploitation. This brings us, in fact, to the third criticism I mentioned above of any such politics of finitude, namely that the link it proposes between existence and politics risks reducing to the fascistic exploitation of ontology. As Nancy shows in La Communauté des Œuvres, the work of fascism is precisely to make death the work of the community, to consolidate the community on the basis of its assumption of death as its task. Not for nothing is the defining imagery of fascism that of the death's head, its defining slogan, Viva la muerte. Hence, Antelme's insight that the doomed project of the Nazi oppressor is to make present the inappropriable encounter with the limit. This fascistic appropriation of death as communal task stands as emblematic of any attempt to develop a politics on the basis of an ontological proposition. It is not for politics to take up being as its object. This way lies Nazism. The insistence that nothing is too low to serve as a locus of possible political subjectivation reads, from this perspective, like a totalitarian declaration seeking to incorporate all existence into a political project without remainder. This has been the direction of Nancy's most recent interventions, not least in the afterword that he wrote to my book, in which he pointed this out, in which he has repeatedly cautioned against the risks of overextending the purview of politics, of overemphasizing its ability to colonize existence, indeed of producing just such a colonization by seeking or agreeing to base political struggle on this existential ground. But we should be careful here. To argue that every existence as such already stakes an immanent claim to equality is not to dictate that every existence must be politically articulated, nor that any such articulation must entail the wholesale political appropriation of existence without remainder. Granted, it is to refuse any definitive separation between every existence as such and the realm of the political. But this does not have to be understood as incorporation. Rather, it might be thought of as the maintenance of an open channel, through which a demand may, or equally may not, be heard. For there is no existence which is not already touched by the logic of sacrifice. As Blanchot's arguments in La littérature et le droit à la mort make clear, as soon as I speak the words, any existence, sacrifice is minimally at work. We are not at liberty to keep our hands clean of any degree of sacrificial relation to existence, unless we can manage somehow neither to act nor to enter into any form of symbolization. The fact that the encounter with the limit never arrives that existence is never appropriated within a determinate project, and existence as such is not caught up in the business of appropriation, grasped after and minimally snagged by sacrificial gestures. Antelme's example would be a particularly dramatic demonstration that appropriation is everywhere getting its hooks into existence. These gestures are bound to fail, but to affirm this is already to have politicized existence, and so to have appropriated it to some extent, in the name of the refusal of appropriation. This is tangled, but inevitably so. That the transition from ontological is to political ought is fraught with considerable danger should not distract us from the frequency with which it is in fact undertaken, including by those whose work leads us to be most nervous of this articulation. Lévinas would be my perhaps contentious example here. I would mention also Deleuze and Badiou. In these and other cases, mutatis mutandis, an account of the stakes of political activity follows from a fundamental ontological or existential description. Just to be clear, I am not arguing that we can read off specific political imperatives from ontological description. My claim is rather that such descriptions invite argument as to what these imperatives might be. As Sartre puts it towards the end of L'être et le néant, if it is plainly impossible to derive ought from is, it is no less plainly the case that any is invites the question of whether the prescriptions we formulate will, in Sartre's phrase, take their responsibilities seriously in the face of its description. We are not, I believe, in a position to avoid moving between is and ought. We do this all the time. The question is not whether we can avoid any kind of sacrificial relation to existence. The question is, rather, whether we can maintain this sacrifice as minimal. In order to defend existence from the exploitation to which it is subjected, that is to say, from its maximal sacrifice, we may have to enter into something like an attenuated sacrificial economy. But the alternative might not be much more attractive. A strongly sacrificial and, let us note, by definition unopposable economic appropriation of existence on the one hand, on the other, those happy islands of respite this appropriation is pleased to grant. Against this, I would prefer to advocate what, in the spirit of Benjamin, we might think of as a minimal dialectical hope, or a good minimal politicization of existence, precisely in order to oppose the maximal politicization of this existence in the form of exploitation. Such, then, are the defining features and the stakes of the politics of finitude. The forms of domination which characterize our contemporary world are targeting our existence as such, seeking to colonize this existence as such, to infiltrate it with ever more intimate forms of oppression. This is why we cannot simply decide to emphasize the fact that existence will always exceed its attempted political appropriation. While this is certainly true, it leaves us unable to oppose this appropriation on its own ground. Against these developments, the politics of finitude asks us to accept the minimal sacrifice at work whenever we engage in the specifically political affirmation of existence, precisely in order to celebrate this existence as properly ungraspable. The desire to police and to extract profit from even the matter of this existence is by definition a form of abuse. The equality declared by our common exposure is immediately and irreducibly opposed to this attempted exploitation. This cannot be argued anywhere other than the political arena. As a consequence, we are obliged to accept both the minimal politicization of existence and the exorbitant opening of this arena beyond its reasonable current limits. For Deleuze and Guattari, what we need is to invent forms of resistance to the present. At present, it is our existence as such that is under attack. It is on this terrain, accordingly, that we shall have to invent part of our struggle.